Yotam Ottolenghi joins me now in Studio Q. Welcome.
All right, good to be here, Shad.
So what story did you want to tell with this cookbook?
This is a collaboration between myself and the head chef of my West End restaurant called Nopi.
Mm-hmm.
He's called Scully. I call him Scully. And he's a very talented young man from Malaysia, or actually lived most of his life in Australia. But many of the dishes in this book kind of reflect the collaboration. I grew up in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, and he's from Malaysia via Australia. So there's a certain list or range of ingredients that we explore together in the restaurant and now in the book. Quite a lot of, so people that know my work have become accustomed to tahini and pomegranate molasses and preserved lemons. Now there's a lot of pandan, mirin, tamarind, all sorts of Asian ingredients. And I mean, actually the book is a balance of lots. It features quite a lot of ingredients, European, Asian and Middle Eastern, but it's really about our dynamic as a kind of a creative duo.
Was it a stretch for you to understand flavors from places like Malaysia, China, India? As you said, your home is Middle Eastern flavors.
Not so much. I mean, at first I was slightly apprehensive. When Scully started working with me, it was about 10 years ago. He really wanted to get a lot of Asian flavors on the menu. And I said, hold on a minute, mister. You know, this is a Middle Eastern restaurant. But actually, once I've started discovering these flavors, I realized they actually work really well with my sensibilities. You know, if you take the heart of the Middle East, which is, Palestine, Israel, and you start going you start going east, you go through Persia, and India and then Southeast Asia, it kind of makes sense as a journey, as a culinary journey.
Interesting.
You get, we all use lots of chilies, we all use cilantro, we all use different types of citrus. There's a lot of garlic features. I mean, so all these ingredients
They're
actually
like a bridge.
work. Yeah. So if Scully brings in mustard seeds and ginger, which I don't use as much, or tamarind, it kind of makes complete sense. And this is how we collaborate.
So what's a sample dinner menu for a home cook entirely out of Nopi recipes?
Okay, so you would start with something relatively simple to make. I would say like there's some Asian greens with with ginger, chili, garlic, just to kind of make it simple. And then you could have as a main course, if you want to eat meat, we have a twice cooked chicken, which is the most amazing thing. It's cooked in an Asian master stock, and it's something really magical that Scully told me about that many Chinese families have at home. It's a stock made of soy sauce and various other aromatic components, and every family has one, and they cook and cook and cook in it, and it improves over time. You can keep it for years. It's a bit like the sourdough, mother dough that you have to make bread here in the West. And the more you keep it, the more you cook on it, the more flavorsome it becomes. So the chicken is cooked and then in that broth or stock, and then it's recooked again. And served with a chili jam or chili sauce and some citrusy salt.
This is making me very sad about my lunch I'm about to have in the food court after the show.
I'm not here to do that to you. I'm sorry.
So Nopi is the name of your more upscale restaurant.
Yeah.
Can home cooks really achieve something like tuna skewers with coconut mochi cakes and carrot and yuzu salad?
Yeah, they can. And they can also pick and choose certain things that suit them more than others. So for instance, in the dish that you mentioned, you can make the tuna beautifully seasoned with soy sauce and lots of other ingredients and kind of leave out the mochi cake, just do the yuzu slaw. So you don't need to follow the whole recipe, but we kind of outline how far you want to go, and then we say to the reader, look, if you want to make it a little bit simpler for yourself, leave out an ingredient or two. But we definitely had the home cook in mind in this recipe book.
As you mentioned, you grew up in Israel. What was food like for you growing up?
I think I was like the luckiest person in the world because my dad is Italian, so we had a lot of beautiful Italian food. People in the world are pretty much very familiar with Italian food. But I also had as I walked out the door of the house, all these wonderful flavors in Jerusalem were Arab Palestinian dishes, all the, aubergine, baba ganoushas of this world, and hummus and tahini and beautiful stuff with lentils and bulgur wheat. So a really good mix of kind of European food and Middle Eastern food. So I just inhaled it. It was so marvelous.
And do you remember being very aware of all these flavors as a child?
I don't think I knew how to call them by names, but that it was such a mixed thing and what it meant. But I really remember always enjoying food. My dad and mom always used to make fun of me of how much of a greedy guts I was growing up. Like I was always wanted to go to restaurants, even when I was like 7. So I always loved food.
Your father was quite religious. I understand your mom, though, wasn't exactly keeping kosher.
Yeah.
Tell me about your quote-unquote turkey sandwiches in your school lunch.
Yeah, that's a story that my mom doesn't like me to tell, but I will tell it still because we're in a very intimate venue here, right? My mom, my mom was from a German background, and they didn't keep a kosher kitchen, so she used to buy ham. Like under the counter in Jerusalem in the 70s. It was quite hard to get ham, but she loved it so much. And then she used to put it in our sandwiches for school. Not a problem for me, but it was a big deal, in a Jewish school in Jerusalem. So she always used to tell us to say these are ham sandwiches. I think everybody could see through it. But
a turkey, you mean?
Sorry, turkey sandwiches, yeah. It was just a little bit too pink to be a turkey.
Undercooked or something. You had other lives before this one. You were working towards almost on your way to a doctorate in philosophy. You worked as a journalist.
I did.
Were you happy doing those things?
So in my 20s, I went to university. I studied comparative literature and philosophy, and I worked as a journalist. I loved doing those things. I felt, I think the problem that I had is that I found it quite stressful to be constantly having to think. I know it sounds really weird, but when I started cooking, first not professionally, but then professionally, I found that even though I had to cook for many people in quite a stressful service environment, as soon as I went home, I could switch off. I didn't have homework. And I found that life in academia and in journalism always meant that you always needs to be on guard, read the next book or magazine or article. And being a cook or a chef is much more relaxing in that respect. But now I've kind of gone through a whole circle, and now I write books, so I've got all the stress again.
But kitchens are known to be very stressful environments.
Yeah. Kitchens are stressful in a different way. They're stressful as long as the service is happening. It's very stressful. I mean, it's intensely, extremely, intense. But in a sense, after you've done it, and then you go home and you can chill.
Is that how you discovered that it was your passion, the fact that you could turn off?
I think that was one thing. I find that cooking, still to this day, is one of those activities, because it's very, very physical. You can use your hands. You don't need to use your mind too much. It's very intuitive. It's one of those activities that I could do without stretching myself too much, and it's quite nice. It's meditative. Many people know that if you wanna wind down, you go to the kitchen and you cook. But if you do that for a living or you do it a lot, then I think it does have a good effect on you, on your well-being.
How did you break the news to your parents?
Well, I was living in Amsterdam at the time, in Holland, and I sent, it was pre-email, so I sent a letter with my dissertation and a note inside saying, okay, folks, this is the result of my last 5 years at university. Now I'm going to move on, and I'm going to be trying my life, my career, a chef's career. My dad was not impressed. I got a phone call, and he said, you want to consider that before you throw away this prospect. But he was cool. He's great. I mean, I told him, look, I want to give it a shot. And although he thought it was a very stupid thing to do, he kind of went with it. And I think now he's changed his mind.
Reminds me of my uncles used to tell us growing up, the first degree is for us. You take that degree and you give it to us, and then you can do what you want after that.
I think that's a very good answer.
Philosophy and journalism, did they teach you anything that you brought to cooking?
I think they taught me a lot. I can't really pinpoint how, what I absorbed in the first part of my life have affected the way I cook. But these days, I think much of my cooking involves telling stories, especially with the Jerusalem book. It was all about, researching, telling the narrative of my life, of Sammy's life, who's my co-author, Palestinian. And I think to create that story I really used the stuff that I learned before, and when you grow up and you turn into kind of a rounder person, if you do different things and have different careers, and I think that really has helped me as a cookbook writer.
I was thinking about the level of detail and the acute awareness that's required to create a food experience. Is that a thread through some of the different things you've done?
It could be, because I'm very particular about the way I do things, and I go through an agonizing process with every recipe. You know, it starts off with an idea, but by the time it ends up as a written entity, it's a very long process. You know, it's putting it to the test over and over and over again, and then analyzing over and over again. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right in the sense that there is a degree of detail that I always I can't help myself. I just do it.
You've always had that orientation.
Yeah.
You mentioned your cookbook, Jerusalem, your friendship and partnership with Sami Tamimi, Palestinian, you yourself, Jewish Israeli. A lot of people talk about that in the media, that partnership. What do you make of people's interest in your collaboration with Sami?
I completely understand it, and I revel in it, because I think when Sami and I formed our relationship, our friendship, it started off as something that it was absolutely not political at all. We met in London. He was a Palestinian guy. I was a Jewish guy. We hung out together, went to bars and cafes and restaurants and had fun. And, we had a lot in common. The politics of it had never really mattered. Mm-hmm. I think also because we weren't living in Israel. So in a sense, it made it all much easier because there wasn't that daily pressure. Mm-hmm. But later on, when they kind of started noticing us, it became a big thing, and I realize now that in a sense we symbolize something for some people, that there is hope, there is a chance, there could be a sense of collaboration or working together for something which is not related to the conflict. It's kind of beyond the conflict, and I think that's why I'm quite happy for people to kind of project on us their hopes, or even though it's not very realistic.
At the same time, it is a model for cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite cautious to say that it's a model, because, as I said, I think it happened to work. I think it's not by chance that it works. We're quite far away from the actual heat of that fire that actually is really happening at the moment. I mean, that distance really, really helps. So it's a model to a degree, but there's a lot of circumstances that are different to the daily lives of Jews and Palestinians in Israel and Palestine.
Commenting on these sorts of issues as a chef, does that feel like a burden? How do you feel about taking on that role in the media? Yeah,
it is hard sometimes. I find myself, because food for me is kind of the most political and the least political thing at the same time. So it's the least political because we all eat, and it's an activity that we do. It's kind of we don't have choice. It's like going to the bathroom. It's like something that you do all the time, and just in order to live. So it's not, you don't need to make decisions. Well, you do, but it's kind of immediate. Mm-hmm. But then it's the most political thing because we all have it in common. We all feel very strongly about it. So it's hard. I try to kind of not turn every conversation about food into a political conversation, to have some of those very clean and neat and just about my passion for what I do and for what I eat. And then other times, I have to be drawn into a political discussion.
Do you feel that that dimension of culture when you're cooking food from home?
I always feel that. I'm very sensitive to where things originate from and what kind of ethnic or religious framework I'm working. So if I want to learn a cuisine, I try to learn a little bit more than that, just the ingredients. Scully, as I mentioned, my collaborator, he's originally from Malaysia. So I've taken time to travel in Malaysia a few years ago, and just in order to get an idea that I have a better understanding of what I eat. It's not just the laksa, it's how the laksa is, where it belongs.
The context.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to get that context, because we're surrounded by food and ingredients so much these days that sometimes we forget where things started. You know, when you watch a dish on Instagram, it's so void of context. You know, the only context is the filter that you chose to put on the dish. So it's really important for me to learn the stories.
We do forget how fortunate we are to be able to experience food from so many different contexts.
Yeah, we also forget that, you know, there has been like thousands of years of things happening before us. You know, we have not invented food.
Also, in terms of culture and politics, you've spoken out on surrogacy for gay parents. Why has that been important to you?
Well, because I had 2 children now through surrogacy. Because I'm gay, and you know, we couldn't have children any other way. And it wasn't a subject that people talked about it so much. It's a bit more in the public arena now, but it wasn't a few years ago when I published an article in The Guardian telling the story of my journey to parenting and to becoming a father. And I felt it was almost my responsibility to tell the story, because being gay these days has become so much easier than it was when I came out, maybe, you know, more than 20 years ago. But it's all about visibility. It's all about telling stories, and the story of gay parenting has not been told enough. So I almost felt like, although I was reluctant because I didn't want to make this public, I felt like it's almost my job to talk about it, so other people see that it's done, it's happening, it's there, and it's just part of our lives.
Those stories contribute to the understanding and
but
freedom.
also the normalizing.
Yeah.
You know, it happens, it's here, and then people get much less wound up about it because they've heard it, they've seen it.
Even more importantly, as a chef, are you able to get your kid to eat vegetables?
I was so arrogant about a year ago. If you'd spoken to me, I said my son eats everything, and now he's 2.5 and he's very picky. So this is good news to all parents struggling. Even my boy only eats pasta and potato at the moment, but I'm not too nervous about it. I know that he's going to come out of this phase eating all sorts of wonderful things.
For years, you wrote a very important vegetarian recipe column in The
Yeah.
Guardian as a non-vegetarian. Did you ever get flack from the purists?
I did. Actually, at first, the vegetarians were, you know, up in arms. Why is not one of us writing the vegetarian column? But I think this reaction belongs to a world that I quite happily I say we're kind of beyond, because I think these days people are eating more vegetables even if they're not vegetarians, and the whole idea is that the way to win people over is not by excluding them from the group, but actually including them in the group. So even if you sin occasionally with a slice of salami, you can still be a vegetable lover, you know, and that's how I see it. I'm not a purist. I eat everything, but I do like my vegetables.
How do you ideally want people to see vegetables in their diet?
I don't want people to. I don't preach, and I never did. And I think it's very important not to, because this is a great way to alienate people. What I do is show vegetables in the best colors possible. You know, with all the wonderful spices and herbs and condiments that you can use, and all the wonderful ways of cooking vegetables, braising, grilling, you know, steaming. You know, there's so much you could do. So I put it out there, and I hope people enjoy it. And actually, people do, because you see vegetables all over the place now. And
The joy of them.
the joy of them, and the menus of serious restaurants have vegetables at the top of the menu. This was unheard of a decade ago.
Okay, we've put a recipe from your new book on the Q website. It's for butternut squash with ginger, tomatoes, and lime yogurt.
Good choice.
Good choice.
Yeah, definitely.
And any parting tips for listeners that are planning to make that particular dish tonight?
Well, first of all, it's a perfect dish for serving whenever you like, because all the components could be prepared in advance and just put together the very last minute. The tomatoes can be prepared, and they even would keep for 2 days, and the butternut can just be roasted a couple of hours in advance. I always think about dinner parties. The last thing you want to do is stress, because you just want to have fun when you've got guests over, and this one is perfect for that. You just put it all together and dress it, and there you go.
Great dish for entertaining.
It's a very good one, yeah.
Thank you so much, Yotam.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.